One rare example of a positive reaction to a stereotype. Harvard University, I think a pretty good research institute, decided to test the math abilities of a large group of Asian girls. And so they took them into room number 1 and they gave them a math test. Then they lined them all up and walked them down to room number 2. Well, on the way, one of the researchers said, well, everyone knows girls aren't good at math. And so they go into room number 2 and they take a math test. And they didn't do half as well as they did before. Then they line them all up and they take them down to room number 3. And on the way, another researcher says, well, yes, but everyone knows Asian girls are good at math. They go in, they do better than either of the times before. So that's one example of a positive reaction to a stereotype. And so Harvard got to name it and they called it stereotype lift. And there's one other example that was tried. They took a large group of men into a gym and tested and videoed their jumping skills. And so they did that, and they got pretty tired. They took them out, gave them a break. Then they lined them up and marched them back in. But on the way back in, one of the researchers said, well, everyone knows white men can't jump. They go in, and the white guys did not do half as well as before. But guess what? The African-American men did much better than before. So that shows another example of stereotype lift. And I believe it also shows that scientists can have a sense of humor. Now, I feel like I can make fun of nerds because I am one. And I've worked mostly with them, too. So I can even imagine that on Saturday nights, they're watching these videos again and having a good time, and probably planning out what they'll test next. And I'm hoping it won't be women drivers. Okay, so let's continue talking a little bit about positive change and how we can work with the opposite gender. So I've been asked by a few people to give a tip for the men and a tip for the women. So let's start with the women. The guys want me to ask you, can't you see I'm watching football? Well, the thing is that men tend to like to focus in on one particular thing that they're doing. And it's irritating if they're interrupted. So that's something that you do need to know as your men and women are working together. There's a component of this that plays out in the workplace. And I interviewed John Gray of Mars Venus fame about this. And I said, what advice would you give a woman who is supervising men? And he says, well, that can be very tricky. The most important thing is to know that he wants to focus in on something. And if you need to talk to him, you need to be aware of that. So he advised them for the woman to go to the man's office and say, Jim, I need to discuss something pretty important with you. Can I talk to you now, or should I come back in 30 minutes? And I thought, well, that seems like good advice, but I would advise a woman a little differently to preserve her authority. So I've adjusted just a little bit to say, go to his office and say, Jim, I have something important to discuss with you. Can you come to my office now or in an hour? Would that be better? And that way she preserves her authority. She's talking to him in her office. And he got to make the decision of when, so it should be less irritating. Okay, now here's the tip for the men that I mentioned to Chris Snook after one of your meetings. And he said it would definitely help him. So he said it would help him at home. Okay. So he said, go ahead. Yeah. So I was telling him about my speech to an annual conference of college professors. And there were about 1,200 people in the room, pretty much half men, half women. And I'm talking about gender communication style differences, and how men, much more often than women, adopt the devil's advocate style. And that's where someone presents an idea to you, and you show them possible weaknesses in their thinking. But it's point after point after point after point. So as I'm saying this, I'm looking out in the audience, in the middle of the audience, there's this white-haired man, and he's like this, he has this frown on his face, and he's shaking his head, no, no, no. So I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I hope he doesn't say anything. I hope he doesn't cause a problem, but he's definitely upset. And then I hear this voice, and unfortunately it's my voice. And I'm saying, sir, is something bothering you? Is something the matter? And he stands up, because he's a professor, and he stands up and he said, yes, he says, I've been a professor for 35 years, and everyone knows the way you help students is to point out weaknesses in their thinking, or possible weaknesses in their thinking. And he said, I've had the same thing happen every semester. Half, women, half men show up at my office hours each week. And after about the second week, not as many women show up, and by the third week, hardly any show up. So, but I looked down the hall, and down at Frank's office, there's still half women, half men at the end of the semester. So he said, I just decided there's something about me that the women don't like, and I've just got to get over it. And he said, now it's clear as day. He said, I'm going to stop doing that. And then he starts to sit down, and he said, oh, this will help me at home. And then I hear 3 other men in the audience say, this will help me at home, too. So it's just difference in style. Sorry, Chris.
You're right. At least I'm not the only one.
That's true. That's true.
600
And you haven't been
others.
doing it for 35 years either. Okay, now we've talked about stereotypes, how you can work with them, doing a little bit of something that'll help yourself, something that'll help the other person. Now I want to talk about conventional wisdom. It's one of my favorite topics. It's those buckets full of what everyone knows. And you'd make my day if you made a conscious effort to start looking further whenever you see something that is what everyone knows. But more importantly, you would be helping your business if you looked into those things. Let me tell you about one business that saved millions of dollars a year and is continuing to by asking just one question of its female employees. When Mike Cook was CEO of Deloitte, one of our largest accounting firms, he thought his company had a problem. They were going to colleges and they were recruiting 50% men, 50% women, but only 5% of their partners were female. And he wondered, why are all the women leaving before they reach that point? It's a huge turnover problem. It's very expensive. It's costing the company millions of dollars a year for recruitment, training, and loss of productivity when they leave. And it's especially important, this talent drain, because right now 6 out of 10 college graduates are female. And so it's something that they really, really want to pay attention to. So he went around to each of their partners, mostly men, and said, why are the women leaving? Why aren't they staying? And each man pretty much decided, well, they're leaving to start families. And Mike Cook thought, that's what I thought too. So he was going to leave it at that. But then he thought, this is too big for the company. We need to solve this problem. So he decided to handle it the way he would for one of their clients. Really do it scientifically. So he got the names and numbers of all the women who had worked the last 3 years. And he contacted each one and found out nearly all of them were still working. They're working for competitors. Some had started their own businesses. Some had changed careers. And he said, well, was it for family reasons? And they said, no, we'd already started families. We figured out that balancing act. We've gotten that down. That wasn't the problem. They said, when we looked around, we saw a male-dominated environment where all the best clients that came in were given to men, and the women took longer to be promoted than men. So they said, I decided I just had to leave the company. It wasn't going to get any better. So they said they didn't want to burn any bridges when they were leaving. So in the exit interview, they all said, well, I'm leaving for personal reasons. And to the men, it sounded like family reasons. So that's how that confusion got around. So Mike hired an outside consulting company to put on 2-day workshops. And all these things were discussed between all the men and women. And he said, every manager has to attend a 2-day workshop. Well, a lot of managers thought, oh, I don't want to go to that. And everyone could see the numbers. So what turned out to be embarrassment the first quarter turned out to be an incentive the next quarter. And it worked out very well, very, very well for the company, because now they have no female turnover is above the male turnover.